So I'm excited to get started with our first session, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce our first speaker, a woman, a scientist, and an advocate who hardly needs an introduction, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin presently works as a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. She also speaks around the world on both autism and cattle handling. Temple Grandin is now the most accomplished and well-known adult with autism in the world. Her fascinating life with all its challenges and successes has been brought to the screen. She's been featured on NPR, National Public Radio, major television programs such as the BBC special, The Woman Who Thinks Like a Cow, ABC's Primetime Live, The Today Show, Larry King Live, 48 Hours, and 2020. She has also been written about in many national publications such as Time Magazine, People Magazine, Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, and the New York Times. I am excited to have the opportunity to interview Dr. Grandin and to kick off this summit discussing being different, not less, and seeing her lens on supporting individuals with autism and helping them shine. So I'll ask Dr. Grandin to join us now.
It's really great to be here, and I'm going to do some short kind of introduction, and then we're going to kind of go into an interview format.
Absolutely.
When I was 3, I had no speech. I had all the standard symptoms of autism. Finally got verbal by age 4. I was very lucky to get into very good early education by the time I was 2.5. Cannot emphasize enough the importance of early intervention, and I got that. And a lot of speech therapy, one-on-one. Also, a lot of emphasis on turn-taking games. Everything, they turn all kinds of activities into little turn-taking games at my speech therapy school that 2 teachers just ran out of their house. And the main speech therapist would work for like an hour one-on-one, and then the other teacher worked with the other 5 kids doing a turn-taking game. I think it's very important to get the kids to wait and take turns. And one of the things my speech teacher did is she slowed down when she talked to me. Because if the grown-ups talked too fast, it would just go into gibberish, just total gibberish. She slowed down. She enunciated the consonant sounds. She also gave me time to respond. A lot of these kids are like a computer that's just really slow. It takes time for the child to respond. You've got to give them that time. And I was mainstreamed into a normal kindergarten at age 5, of 1950s old-fashioned kindergarten. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of good teachers. I've observed teachers working with the little kids, and I don't care what the name of the therapy is, but good teachers have the knack. They know just how hard to push without driving the kid into sensory overload. We've got to make sure we don't accidentally force a kid into sensory overload. Had a great 3rd grade teacher, also a really good science teacher. I was a bad student in high school. He got me interested in studying. Mentors are extremely important. And maybe, Laura, you might have a question now?
Yes, ma'am. I think, that thread of mentoring comes up in your book, Different, Not Less, a lot. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about the importance of having mentors for students as they grow up?
Well, the first mentor I had was my mother, and she had a very good sense of just how much to stretch me just slightly outside the comfort zone, not throwing me into the deep end where I would go into total sensory overload. Mm-hmm. And sensory problems in autism really are real. There's still some people that don't think sensory problems are real. They're real. They also are very variable. She'd stretch me, but give me choices. Mm. And then my speech teacher, when I was 2.5, she was a really good teacher. And then in my elementary school, the head teacher, Mrs. Deach, was really important. And mother and the school worked together. And the rules for behavior were the same home and school. I cannot emphasize enough that home and school need to be on the same team, working together. And if I had a temper tantrum, the rule was no television that night. Didn't matter whether it was at home or at school. Mrs. Deach would call up my mother. We get into all different kinds of discussion about this type of school or that type of school. A really large, chaotic classroom I probably would not have worked without an aide. I was in an old-fashioned 50s classroom with only 13 students in the class. So I worked without an aide in that situation. And then when I got into high school, I was a goof off. I didn't care about studying. And I had a great science teacher. And he gave me interesting projects. And he made studying now a pathway to the goal of becoming a scientist. And my aunt out at the ranch was another mentor. When I was 15, I went to visit my aunt's ranch. And that's where I got introduced to the cattle industry. I think there's an awful lot of students today that don't get exposed to enough things to find out what they might be interested in. And one of the worst things the schools have done is taken out all the hands-on classes: cooking, sewing, woodworking, art, metalworking, auto shop, all of these things that can introduce students to careers. And there were also some good mentors out in the industry. There was a small contractor just starting his business, and he seeked me out to design projects for him. And he was attracted to my ability in doing drawings. The other thing I learned getting my job started is forget the regular interview. You just show off the work. There's my drawings right there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And did you find that you just, like, as a child, you just innately had that ability, or was that developed through your mentors as well, your drawing ability?
Well, drawing ability showed up maybe second and third grade, really started to blossom at third grade. And we need to take the thing the kid's good at and expand on it. I was just drawing the same horse head over and over again. And mother said, well, let's do the whole horse. Let's expand that. Let's try some media other than pencil. In other words, expand it. And the thing about autistic kids on the fully verbal end of the spectrum is they tend to have uneven skills. And we need to be working on the skill where they're good. There's too much emphasis on pounding away at the deficit.
Yep, absolutely.
What's called an object visualizer. Everything I think about is in pictures. And I've talked about that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. Object visualizer. And another kind of mind is the visual spatial mathematical mind. And the visual spatial mathematical mind and the object visualizer, what the research shows is that they're two different things. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, I present research up through 2013 on this. But since the publication of The Autistic Brain, there's been a whole bunch more studies. So the object visualizer and the mathematical mind are kind of two different things. So let's say you have a little third grader that's good at math, move them ahead. Don't make them do the baby stuff. And I would use some of the old-fashioned math books. I've talked to my family where they gave some old-fashioned math books to a nonverbal guy, and he just took off with them. Old-fashioned math books that are just numbers. Move them ahead in math, because they're going to turn into behavior problems if you make them do the boring stuff. And don't give me a reason not to do it, because it's just a bureaucratic reason.
I think it's fascinating to look at that. That strengths-based approach is really what the foundation of this symposium is how to view an individual with autism not based on deficits, but on where their strengths lies. And in your book, Different Not Less, you really highlight that with each story that you tell. Each individual has a shining strength that they work towards, and that makes them successful in certain areas. And I found that to be really, really, interesting when we looked at, Stephen with his artistic skills. And that was the path that he really wanted to follow, despite maybe some people not being as supportive of him. Or with Stephen Shore, the autism advocate, I found that really resonated with me. This month we're seeing a lot more of autism acceptance. And when I read that chapter on Stephen Shore on moving from awareness to acceptance to then appreciation and then action, that felt so strong with me right now, because you're seeing that shift a lot this year, I believe, into more of that acceptance. And I wonder, what do you suggest for the professionals that are watching us today to start moving from acceptance to appreciation? You know, how do we make that next jump?
Well, first of all, I want to explain that in the Different Not Less book, the 18 people that are profiled in there, those profiles are their own words. I more was the editor of this book. And we had a format where they had to, send it in a format. But it's their own words. And all of the people in Different Not Less had jobs. And this is the other big thing, is not making the transition to the job world. And I think a big problem is a lot of moms overprotect these kids and they're not learning basic skills. They're not learning things that I learned when I was 8, like shopping for comics. And I got a little allowance and I could buy 5 comics for 50 cents back in the 50s. I think now it's $5 for about the same amount. And I learned that if I wanted that 69-cent balsa wood airplane with the propeller, I had to save for 2 weeks. Mother had considered these allowance items. She never bought those little comics and kites and airplanes and candy bars. But that taught a really important skill.
Right.
And that's not hard to do. And the other thing is, I think there's a lot of really skilled people out in industry, like out in Silicon Valley. A lot of those programmers are probably autistic. I've been there. When I was out working on the big projects that were, like building Cargill plants and things like this, I'm going to estimate that maybe 20% of the really high-end skilled tradespeople I worked with that were inventing equipment, had patents, owned metal fabrication companies, were autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. The special ed department builds the stuff. And I'm saying that seriously. And now these kids are just getting addicted to video games. And I'm really concerned about this. And this is my most basic book on autism, The Way I See It. The Way I See It has a whole lot of little short chapters. It's really good for professionals working with younger kids. And I've got a chapter in the whole video game stuff. And that book is now only 2 years old, so it's relatively recent. And I reviewed the literature on video game addiction, and it's a problem. And we have got to keep that under control. Now, I've heard 3 success stories where they took a young adult addicted to video games, weaned him off slowly to car mechanics. And they found out that car mechanics was more interesting than video games.
And do you think that was, you talked about that importance of, therapy and home carryover, school and home carryover. Were those stories kind of a demonstration of that, where we worked with the video game addiction by highlighting that movement into maybe doing mechanics with the combination
Well, they
of family?
basically did. These were all young adults, so they were old enough to work in a shop. They were all over 18 or older. And they were really bad, in the bedroom, video game recluses. Right. And they just started, weaning them off, take them over to the shop. And you've got to find that right person to work with them too. And but we've got to teach working skills. I just cannot emphasize that enough. And it needs to start young. Okay, the kids in the pipeline right now, it starts with chores at home. Right. We have to find something to replace the paper route, because I'm having all kinds of grandfathers coming up to me, and they find out they're autistic when the kids are diagnosed.
That's interesting.
I'm finding that quite often. Now, of course, COVID, I'm not finding it as much because everything's been online. But I'd say that when I showed a slide at live meetings about grandfathers discovering they were autistic at a large conference, I guarantee you I'd find one every conference. When I did that, it was a big conference, 500, 300, 500 or more people at it. And they had jobs like, computer scientists, NASA scientists, accountants, various jobs. And they all had paper routes when they were 11. So they had learned working skills young. So we've got to find something to replace the paper route. Maybe a volunteer job at a church, something where somebody else outside the family is the boss, and they've got to do something on a schedule, and preferably something without too much multitasking.
Yes.
And the thing I do with design work, there's no multitasking for that. In computer programming, there's no multitasking. You're using all long-term memory.
So it's interesting. You talked about before when you were talking about your art, how your mom stretched you, just a little bit. And I think that that's really important as well, that when you're using those strength-based approaches, that you are considering the strength, but then pushing just a little bit, providing a little bit of a challenge for that potential for growth.
Well, that's right. And mother also always gave me choices. When I was 15, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. We were Easterners, came from a non-ag background, and the opportunity came up to go to my aunt's ranch. Mother gave me a choice. I could go for a week. If I hated it, come back, or stay all summer. I got out there and I loved it. And over again, I've talked to parents, well, they got their kid went to sleepaway camp and loved it. Mm-hmm. I've now visited 2 camp programs for autistic kids. There's one called Elijah's Retreat in Jacksonville, Texas. There's another one in Kearney, Nebraska. And I think one of the most valuable things these camps do is they show these parents that their kid actually can do stuff. At Absolutely. The one at Kearney, Nebraska, moms would say, you got my son on a boat? You got to be kidding. This could be somebody that was nonverbal, and a few of them even got on the zip line. That needs to be introduced a lot more carefully. And then at the Elijah's Retreat, it's horseback riding, it's nature walks, it's gardening. And they say the sweet spots have the family there 3 or 4 nights. They have cabins there. The family, goes in the cabin. No computer, no TV, and no internet connection. The phones work poorly there. And they said 3 or 4 nights is the sweet spot, because for the first couple of nights, the kids go through withdrawal. Learned at a 3rd camp out in California for normal kids when they were given a chance to do free play. And then they discover that these other things are really fun. And one of the things that a lot of these parents learn is that their kid can actually do stuff.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the most important functions that one of those camps can do, is show the parents their kid actually is capable of going on a boat. And he found out that he liked it. Or riding a horse, and they found out that they liked it.
I think that that's, it's so fascinating to come from my background. So I've worked as a professional in the school system for a long time, and, really moving on, educational plans, we tend to use more of a deficit-based model. And we're really working now on using that strengths-based model. So you can look at how students are doing and encouraging them to want to grow and learn more by working with their strengths versus those areas where, it's a little bit more difficult. And for, the professionals that we have here, I'm curious as to how we can speak with a voice to families of saying, it's okay to have a challenge for your child, because we want them to grow, when parents can sometimes be a little bit more that they want to hold their children close and protect them.
Well, this is the problem. And the problem is that in a lot of cases, they're smothering them. And I confronted one mom about her kid, never had gone shopping. This is another big problem with teenagers. Never gone shopping. These are kids in school, fully verbal. Right. I was shopping when I was 8 years old. And I suggested that a boy go in a store and buy something. And the mom said, she couldn't let go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about buying printer paper.
Wow.
Printer paper. Yes, printer paper, really. And maybe I wasn't that nice about it. But I think in the future, she's going to thank me.
I agree.
Another kid I ran into in the airport, just before COVID hit, 12-year-old, mom and the daughter came up to me. And I was talking to the daughter and found out she hadn't shopped. So I whipped the $5 bill out of my purse and I said, go in that newsstand and buy something. Newsstand was just across the hall. You could see it, from the gate room. And she went and bought a drink and brought it back and gave me the change.
Right.
First time she'd shopped.
What an empowering moment. I think we forget about empowering our children with autism to do different things, and how exciting it would be to say, yeah, I can do that. That that you learn that you don't have to always have someone do something for you, and then being motivated by that to want to do and try more new things.
And you do it slowly. I suggested she go to the newsstand that was across the hall, and we could sit in the gate room and we could see the entrance to the newsstand. I didn't send her to the other end of the terminal.
Right. You're still providing that.
Well, and I, you see it now as a visual thinker. You see, I see it. I see it. I'm not going to send her all the way into the other end of the double concourse thing.
Mm-hmm.
Going to do that. But I just did it kind of casually. I was down in Argentina, and there was another adult woman who'd never shopped. I found out she liked National Geographics. So we just went out in the town. I don't speak any Spanish. We went out in the town, and we went by a used bookstore, and guess what I saw in there? A National Geographic. And I pointed to that, and I pointed to her purse, and I said, buy it. And I walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And she bought it. I knew she had money. I mean, yeah, it was the first time that she'd ever bought something in a store by herself.
So we're in a really
life skills.
We're in a really interesting time right now, and I'm trying to kind of look at some of the questions in the Q&A and see what are some themes coming up. And so I do see a few questions related to, we almost have more of an addiction to screen time now because of the lockdowns and COVID-19 and everything. And do you see that as having some more negative impacts on some of our children, and encouraging people now that we have to start moving away from just screen time, but having free play at home, like you were saying at before, just if you're not comfortable going out into the world, you can still have those opportunities in your home.
Well, yes, and this is the reason why I did this book, Outdoor Scientist.
Just released. Congratulations.
Bestseller list for kids. And it's, the first chapter, and there's my sisters and I's childhood rock collection. It's things that you can do outside. They're right there. I mean, I walk around the neighborhood every day, and I saw a duck flying back and forth over where I live. And I think he or she had lost a mate, just going crazy, going back and forth, a single, like a mallard.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a mallard here before. But there's just all kinds of interesting things you can observe just outside. And then this is my Calling All Minds. This is all my childhood airplane and kite projects. And I had to tinker to make those things work. I spent hours making a little bird kite work. That's something you can just do, at your house. I was the other day, I went over to school, which is sort of partly open, and some ranchers were in the parking lot because we have a meat store there to buy some meat, and they had a little 3-year-old kid, and I encouraged, the little kid was learning how water could flow from the gutter from the roof, clean water off the roof of our building, go under this metal thing on the sidewalk, come out the other end, and the 3-year-old was understanding how that worked. Well, that's teaching something right there. And that rain spout, we have them all over the place where I live here. You learn how water flows. And the 3-year-old, I'd say he's about 3.5. He was just fascinated with this, and he was running back and forth between the two ends of the thing. And it's something that every time I go to school, I walk over that. There's a metal plate on the sidewalk and go over it every day. Nothing dangerous about it. It's just a little thing this deep. But we just, get them out doing things. Now, I think we got some real problems with our early intervention programs. With trying to teach a 2-year-old, 3-year-old over Zoom is not going to work.
Definitely a challenge.
The professional can do is coach mom or somebody else how to do it. That's a big mess. But I think more and more we need to be just finding things for kids to do that are just right there. And so in the Outdoor Scientist, since I wrote that book, I've observed squirrel trying 3 times to bury a nut next to the gazebo right in front of my house. I saw a crow sample different water from potholes in the road, and he didn't like the one in the middle of the road.
I think that it's just, you're right. The world around us has a lot of different opportunities for that exploration. If we're kind of, or if people are brave enough to go out and start doing some of that exploring, how would you advise professionals to kind of counsel those parents with that anxiety of letting their children explore more, or that they're worried, they're worried because they have the diagnosis and that label is
and the kid's not going to develop then. I don't know how many times I've talked to parents that once they got a kid out in an appropriate job, that they just blossomed when they got out doing things, or they got out in some camp program or something like that. And I spent 25 years in heavy construction. You got to get a job built. You got to get it done. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a rough industry. And I said, I'm going to give you the job trailer version without the swear words. If you don't get your kid out doing stuff, he's not going to develop. And I know you're crying now. You're mad at me now. Future, you're going to help me. There's a scene in the movie where the boss in the HBO movie slams down the deodorant, says, "You stink, use it." I thank that boss now. I thank him. Yeah. And you've got to get your kid out doing things. Now, on the other hand, we're not going to throw them into a racket of super chaotic takeout window at McDonald's. That might be setting up for failure because of the multitasking. When you get a quieter job, or you have them, they're going to work at McDonald's, do a quieter shift that's not quite so busy. So I call that, you don't want to chuck them in the deep end. I suggest, as I talk about it, I visualize it. I suggested that the girl buy something in a store that we could actually see the store that she went to. I did, I see it. There are a tendency to just baby, and then I see all these grandparents out in good careers.
There are a lot of people asking about, applied behavioral analysis and ABA therapy, and your thoughts on that, and whether or not you consider it to be abusive for children. And I'd love to have a response or your thoughts on that.
Well, a lot of the advocates that hate ABA had some very bad old-fashioned ABA where they were forced into sensory overload. They have a good reason for hating it. Mm-hmm. And the more modern ABA recognizes sensory issues and does not do that. Now, I always ask parents that have a young child, let's say maybe 3 or 4 years old, and he's in a therapy. I don't care what the name of it is. I'm more concerned about who that teacher is. I always ask, is your child progressing? And I'm going to call progression more speech, more ability to wait and take turns, dressing, bathing, brushing the teeth, basic skills. Mm-hmm. If the child's progressing, then you're doing something right. And what I've observed is that a good teacher with young children, I don't care what the name of the program is, a good teacher does all the same things. They sort of have the knack. And I know that's not very scientific to say that. Now, I think there's some situations where there's too much ABA going on for too long, especially on fully verbal kids. ABA type things with me were only done up through about age 4. And then after there's when you get a fully verbal kid making his own behavior plan, that's kind of stupid. And interestingly enough, I heard a seminar by Tristram Smith, one of the inventors of ABA, about 20 years ago. And he basically said, it's a little kids program designed to jumpstart speech. And forcing people into sensory overload is not okay. And sensory problems are real, and they're highly variable. I had sound sensitivity. Another kid has touch sensitivity. Others have visual sensitivity. They vary in severity. Now, you can sometimes get a child over a sound sensitivity thing. For example, maybe hates the hairdryer. If the kid turns the hairdryer on themselves, where they initiate the sound, or buzzer on the scoreboard in the gym, take them down there when no one's there and let them play with a button. They might start playing a tune on it. There's a program called Environmental Enrichment. It's an effective treatment for autism. It is evidence-based by Woo, W-O-O, and you stimulate 2 senses at the same time. lot of emphasis with smell and touch being one of the ones you stimulate, like you might smell cinnamon and hold a cold water glass. And you're always, and there's improvements. These are randomized, proper blind studies. But there's some old-fashioned ABA where they absolutely denied the existence of sensory sensitivity. That was wrong, absolutely wrong. And those advocates got subjected to that, and that would have been really painful and terrible, and that's not okay. What are some of the other questions showing? I can't see the Q&A. So what are some of the other questions that are showing? I can only see the chat. So what are some of the other questions that are on there?
Hi, Temple. This is Cindy.
On the AB.
It seems that Laura's internet must be down, but I see a few questions here, and I can go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, why don't you do that? Yeah, Laura's frozen right now.
Yeah,
there's some things wrong. Like my Gmail account this morning, I couldn't get it open. Everything else on the internet worked, and my Gmail account said this page is not working. I'm going, you got to be kidding. Then someone suggested switching some stuff around with some browsers, and then all of a sudden it worked, and I got on. But maybe there's some problem in the system.
Possibly, but I think that she's back. And Laura, I was just about to ask Temple about the question about sensory overload. There were quite a few people that were asking that question.
Well, sensory overload's a real thing, and you don't force people into that. And it's going to vary with the individual on what might cause sensory overload. There's some people where the kind of chaotic classroom where the kids are doing different things in the same room may not work for some people at the workplace. Some people are going to need a quiet place to work. They're going to need sensory breaks. The other big issue with sensory overload for some people on the spectrum, not everybody, just some of them, is problems with lighting. I don't have these problems, but you see, this is where it's variable. But I have had a student that had these problems, and she could not stand the flicker of fluorescent lights. Now, fluorescent lights are getting phased out, but now there's some LED lights that flicker. Only problem is, which ones are they? Because there's 100 different kinds of LED lights. But if you're in a room where the lights are flashing on and off like a strobe light, that's not going to work. So what you might have to do is get that student's desk over by the window. If you can still find old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, they're hard to find now. The old-fashioned Edison bulbs, which do not flicker. You could put a lamp next to the desk with those. Wearing a hat in the classroom can also be helpful. That'd be accommodation. Let them wear a hat, and that helps to block out the ceiling lights, as Stephen Shore does that. Even when he's on Zoom calls, he'll have a hat on that has the name of his university, because he's very proud of the fact that he is a professor there, teaches a statistics class. But it's real, and one of the biggest places I do research is on ways to desensitize it. And the reason why I like this environmental enrichment paper is that it used simple household things, not expensive. I'll give you the title of the paper again. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. And if you type that entire title into Google, it will work.
Thank you for sharing that. Before I lost connection, I do apologize for that disruption. I was thinking about how, when you were talking about the ABA and now with sensory overload, how important it is to really consider the individual needs of an individual with autism. And sometimes it seems like this is a formula, it becomes very formulaic. This is what you do in working with an individual with autism. And I think it's a trap that we don't want to fall into, because people with autism are so unique. Everyone's needs are not the same. So being so mindful and considerate of, well, this might work for a few years, but then we have to reconsider the therapeutic intervention. What are our long-term goals? What is the outcome that we want when we're targeting this? I think that's a really obvious, but sometimes seems like it's a missed concept, that there are so many unique needs and unique considerations.
Well, the other thing is, I think it's good you have things like individual education plans and things like that. But I went to this horrible meeting in California one time for school administrators. A 35-page long individual education plan, that is nonsense. You ought to be able to put it on a business letter, one page. You know, there's a tendency to greatly overcomplicate these things. The other thing I want to look at is the child individual advancing in terms of skills and things. And I have found that working in construction for all these years, and we're working on big factories and big systems, it's all about outcomes. Right. And what's the outcome of education? I think we need to be looking at, where is a student 10 years after high school? That's the true outcome of education. And I had my master's degree by that time, and I was doing those DipVat projects. But I have seen people on the spectrum successfully get advanced degrees and lose it in the workplace because they hadn't been doing any jobs while they were in school. You see, I want to have a gradual transition from the world of school to the world of work. Now, mother got me a sewing job when I was 13, and she just found it in the neighborhood, a little seamstress job. There was a dressmaker that worked out of her home, and mother pitched my skills to her. And I took apart dresses and I hemmed them by hand. And when I did not work out in a regular school. I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting when kids bullied me. And I went to boarding school, did no studying there. They put me in charge of the horse barn. I basically ran their horse barn for 3 years. 9 stalls every day, put them in and out. I ran the horse barn. And I was proud of the fact I was responsible for that.
Yeah.
How much studying was I doing? None. But I had to be at meals. No recluse in the room. I had to be at everything.
So you had expectations set for you, responsibilities set for you, that you would be doing these certain things within the barn, that you would be participating in group meals. And
I had to go to the group meals, and then Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, came on the scene the last year I was there, and then he worked with me, giving me interesting projects, and made education a pathway to the goal of becoming a scientist. And I turned it right around just about overnight. But the thing is, since I'm an object visualizer, never have passed an algebra class. I'm very concerned, especially for the object visualizers. That's only a portion of the autistic people, and even non-autistic students. Algebra, just keeping them out of a lot of things like car mechanics and animation, things like that don't require algebra. And fortunately, college math was not algebra when I took it in 67, and otherwise I don't think I would have graduated from college. They had a class that had statistics and matrices in it and probability. And that was, I could visualize it. It wasn't as abstract. But I'm saying kids flunking algebra can't graduate from high school, and they can't take an auto shop class.
Yeah, there's no other option. There's no other opportunity.
Well, that's the problem. And what you need for a lot of things in life is a way arithmetic was taught to me in the 50s up through 6th grade. That you need. Find the area of a circle. I've designed pneumatic and hydraulic equipment, and you have to know how to find the area of a circle and how to do that.
So we have a lot of questions as well about motivation and how to encourage and motivate students to kind of move towards some of these different opportunities, to move them away from some things they may be perseverating on. What are your thoughts on effective motivation? Well,
let's start with, they'll get fixated on one thing. What you want to do is broaden the fixation. All right, let's say I was drawing a single horse head over and over again. Some other guy, let's draw the stable. Let's draw the saddle. You see something that's associated with it. Or if the kid was interested in cars, well, you can do math with cars. You can learn about how they work. You can draw pictures of cars. In other words, fix that special interest and broaden it, because an interest in cars can turn into a career. You broaden it. Now, the other thing I'm seeing is, how did a kid get interested in cars? He was exposed to them. This is the reason why I'm so opposed to taking out all the hands-on things: theater, music, woodworking, sewing, cooking, art, because they expose kids to things that they can get interested in. I got interested in the cattle industry because I was exposed to it as a teenager. And exposure is really important. And you get exposed to something, you find out you like it, you find out you hate it, and you take that thing and you broaden it. Don't try to stamp it out, try to broaden it. And cars, I'm interested in cars. That's a great field because there's tons of careers involved with cars. There's been some very big successes with the word kind of thinker. Okay, what kind of jobs can the word thinker do? It's not going to be computer programming. That's for your mathematical guy. Specialized retail, selling cars, selling complicated financial products is another one. Because I did a Zoom call for a big bank, and they have 2 autistic salespeople that sell real complicated financial products. You see, that's something where it's knowledge of a specialized thing. And there's been some real successes with a working car dealership in sales, because it's a business social. You learn how to do it. And so, I just got interviewed on the Spanish channel Univision by a young man who was on the spectrum, and he managed to conquer a cashier in a store. He's very proud of the fact that he was able to do that job. For some people on the spectrum, harder job, but he conquered that job and did it. He's very proud of that.
I thought that was also very interesting and different, not less, having that the people highlighted had a variety of different skills and a variety of different jobs where they were successful at times, and then sometimes they weren't as successful, but they found what really worked for them. And one of the chapters talked about someone who had to work for the right person. And I thought that was very interesting. And I wondered if I could get your thoughts on that, working for the right person, and how do we as professionals advocate for the greater world to be the right person for working with a person with autism?
Well, vague instructions at a job do not work. Like when I worked for the magazine, and there's a lot of back doors in the jobs. And there's a scene in that movie where I walk up and I get the editor's card, because I knew that writing for that magazine would be good for my career. And then when I became livestock editor, it was very clear what I had to do. There were certain meetings I had to cover: Arizona cattle growers, Arizona cattle feeders field day, and things like certain shows, the Arizona National Livestock Show, and I had to cover the entire show and make up all the lists of the champion cattle. And then I was free to do some fun feature articles. And I was supposed to turn out a certain amount of column inches every month. It had to be a variety of things that would interest, had to get some dairy cattle in there, get some pigs in there. So it had enough variety. And I also looked at back issues of the magazine too, to get ideas, because I'm a bottom-up thinker. I need specific examples. And I knew exactly what I had to do. You see, that's really good. You see, let's say you work for a tech company and they just said, well, work on programming. That's too vague. It's better to say, well, we're going to do an app for a phone, and it's doing some specific thing. It's got to work on this type of phone and use this much memory. You don't design it for them, but you give them the parameters, and you got to get it done in 6 weeks. So there's also clear deadlines. The magazine had very clear deadlines. That sort of thing works a lot better. But then you can get a change in boss.
Right.
And that can sometimes be bad. And when I was working for the magazine, we had a new boss come in. He thought I was really weird. And Susie, the lady who worked in the graphics, I think she was on the spectrum too. She said, this new boss doesn't like you. We've got to get a portfolio together of all your articles and show it to Jim. It was Susie's idea to do that. And we got together a whole portfolio of everything I'd written in this big scrapbook, and he gave me a raise. So this brings up showing your work. Sell your work rather than yourself. That's why I showed off those drawings earlier.
Absolutely.
As soon as he saw the work, he decided he wasn't going to fire me. He was going to give me a raise, even though I was weird.
And then how, as professionals, are we able to speak to the other side of the community, the people who are hiring our individuals with autism? What advocacy is important, do you think?
Well, the other thing I'm seeing is, okay, a beginner job for a lot of people would be pushing carts to the supermarket or bagging groceries. Now, for some individuals, those jobs might be suitable careers. For someone like me, they'd be training jobs. And I'm seeing a lot of professionals not making that distinction to where that's a summer training job versus a career. Now, for somebody that's got more severe autism, it would be probably a suitable career. I see this all the time. You've got somebody that ought to be doing something a lot more high level, and he's still pushing carts in the grocery store, 8 years later.
Was never given that growth opportunity.
Well, that's right. To try something else. But what I'd like to see in high school is 2 real jobs in a real place, like maybe pushing carts or whatever, before they graduate from high school. So we're not having a sudden transition. Yeah, I call it slowly going from the world of school to the world of work, and having that transition happen slowly, but happen. And then when they get into college, I'll tell you, the number one mistake students make when they get in college, they mess up their first quiz and they don't ask for help. I failed my first math quiz in that class that had the statistics. I went to the professor. He actually tutored me in his office. Then for my master's, I messed up the first quiz in statistics. I hired a grad student to tutor me.
Tutor you.
And I did it right away. There was no disability department then for that.
Right.
So I did it on my own, but I did it right away before I trashed the class.
That transition to college brings up, the importance of the functional skills that we don't always focus in on. Sometimes that focus in on academics becomes, prevalent even within families, earning good grades, and then, by earning good grades, the student's going to be ready to go to college. But I think you really highlighted that self-advocacy piece and knowing what you need when you move on to that next step to be able to really be successful. It's not just the academic, but it's that skill of knowing what it is. That's important, and that's relevant for you to be functional. And I wonder, how would you advise, professionals, educators, families, where we really do focus in on academics sometimes? How do we advocate for those functional skills as well?
Well, we just tell them, can you do laundry? Now, this brings up the issue of hygiene. And there's a scene in the HBO movie about me, Temple Grandin, where the boss slams down the deodorant and says, you stink, use it. That scene happened. And at the time, I was really upset about it. Hygiene's non-negotiable. That you've got to clean it up. We don't accommodate that. And I'm kind of eccentric, but you got to clean it up. And I was just talking to another person who was running a program for people with autism at a university. And one person on the spectrum was saying, well, it hurts my skin, this is sensory again, to dry myself off after I've bathed. Or I didn't like those gunky deodorants they had in the 70s. Well, now you have ones you don't even feel. There's so many more things now, but we have to find a workaround for that. And I said, well, you don't like the towels? Why don't you put a T-shirt on and just let it soak up, and then that T-shirt's your towel. We've got to find a way around this, because this is something, no, we don't accommodate this. You cannot be dirty. And the other thing is just rude. Now there's a lot of conversation now about masking, but I don't think it's masking. Just do a little bit of business social. You don't tell colleagues they're stupid, and just be polite. And I think another reason why their grandfathers had these jobs is because in my generation, they taught social skills. Like the parents would have a party, and the 8-year-olds, and I was one of these, had to put our good clothes on, greet the guests, serve the snacks. Then at the dining room table, we were all seated, and if I stirred my drink with a pencil, mother would say, use the spoon. She'd give the instruction. And this is just some really basic little etiquette kind of stuff that's not hard to learn. That doesn't mean I'm a social butterfly, but I went to a conference one time, and an autistic advocate walked up to me. He had bare feet and a suit on, kind of weird. And he said, "Who the swear word are you?" That was his introduction. There's no excuse for that. Just some basic things like this. This is where the person's got to conform a little bit. But on the other hand, a lot of socializing in a noisy environment. Yep, that gets to be too much sensory overload. And then find clothes that don't itch. Eccentric's fine. Purple hair's fine. I'm not going to fuss about that. But the hygiene thing, we're going to have to figure out a way to, get methods where you got to clean it up, and we need to be working on that while they're still in school before they go to college.
So you're saying from a functional skills standpoint, you have to, clearly establish some non-negotiables.
That's a non-negotiable.
And then there are some workarounds that we work with.
Well, this person said that when he used a regular towel, it had pain. Now, I don't have this problem, but I've had a little bit of it, so I can relate to it. And one person used a hairdryer to dry themselves off with. Okay, that's a workaround. I wouldn't like the noise of the hairdryer. The other person just it took too long to drip dry, so I got to thinking about it. Well, they could have a pair of soft pajamas that they put on, and they could pat themselves dry, and then those hang them up there, their towels. Okay.
So it is respecting the differences.
But I'm going to figure out a workaround here, because this is something that even on the construction site, it's just not tolerated, and can't just be telling people off, saying mean things, a little bit of etiquette.
Right.
And I used to read the etiquette things in the paper about how to behave. Yeah, you're not going to be social butterfly, but you don't walk up to somebody and say, "Who the swear word are you?" Clearly unacceptable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we kind of transition our students out from whatever they're doing in high school, moving into either college or career standpoints, they really need to be ready and aware of what it is that works for them.
But I think there's a thing that the parents, well, in our community, all the kids, when they got to be 8 years old, had to be party hosts and hostesses at the parents' parties. And so now we were not serving alcohol. We just served the snacks. But you had to shake hands, and we weren't allowed to call my mother's friends by their first names. We knew them. We weren't allowed to use them. It was, "Good evening, Mr. Wood," shake hands. "Good evening, Mrs. Wood. Would you like me to take your coat?" And my brother's not autistic. He hated these parties. But you know what he admitted? He became a high bank vice president, and he said what he learned at those parties helped him to talk to older men. And that's not an expensive thing to do. It's not a difficult thing to do. Everybody has parties. And then when they sat down for dinner, they told the kids to get lost. But so the grown-ups could talk. But that taught important social skills. And then also sit at the table and learn to pass the food and say please and thank you. And then if I didn't say please and thank you when we were shopping, mother would cue me. Just some basic things like that. And I think that's another reason why that grandfather or grandmother managed to get a decent job and keep it. Now, I'll tell you where the diagnosis was helpful, and that's in the Different Not Less book. Relationships.
Yeah. Getting
that diagnosis later in life gave tremendous insight into relationships, and a lot of people felt a sense of relief. You see, it's a double-edged sword. You see, in that situation, it was helpful, but in the job front, I'm seeing too many kids being held back. Because I'm thinking about people that own big metal fabrication shop, small metal fabrication shop, people that built my stuff. Oh, they were as autistic as they could be, and 20 patents and a business.
So having the label is both a blessing and a curse in
That's
the sense
the
that.
thing. And then the other big problem we have is you've got the same label on someone who'd be a Silicon Valley computer programmer and on somebody who can't talk and can't do basic skills.
Right.
You have the same label. Does that make much sense? And I think the reason for that is when they're really little, they look the same. I looked real severe when I was 3, real severe.
And that, like you said, that early intervention piece is important to help grow those skills.
Oh no, early intervention is essential. And I think in a lot of places we're doing a decent job on early intervention, but where we're falling down is with these older kids, letting them get addicted to video games. I'm seeing parents say to me, there's 2 paths: into the bedroom or the basement, play video games all day, or get out and get a life. And most of these video game addicts, they're not becoming video game designers.
Right.
They're not. I wouldn't criticize it if they went on into a good career. The other problem I see is I've seen parents who are engineers, computer scientists, get so stuck in the autism box, and their kid's good at math, and they never thought to teach their kid programming. That's staying too much in the disability box.
Right. Really identifying with that label of autism. And now, like, it's Autism Awareness, Autism Acceptance Month, and we are accepting of all of these differences and recognizing all of these differences in individuals with autism, but not letting the label be a barrier to their success, allowing it to be powerful for insight, as you were saying about the maybe the impact it has had on relationships, or the impact that it has on your interactions with other people in your life. But
I talk about one more thing. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is another problem I still have because I'm a slow processor. I can't get my timing right.
No problem.
But I also am looking at the clock here, and we got just a few minutes left, and I want to talk about one of the really important things: friends through shared interests. I was bullied all through high school, and the only places I was not bullied was the activities that I did, kind of horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Another kid, it might be band. I had a mom say, oh, my kid's in band. He's doing just great. Friends who shared interest. It might be one teacher started a Star Wars club.
Right.
So her autistic student liked Star Wars, and he got friends through that. Friends through shared interests. I cannot emphasize that enough.
And that's crucial with motivation. You're motivated to have the social interaction when you're talking about something that you're really interested in. And then because our students on the spectrum are so different, then you have a variety of interaction models that's going on with those children as well. So they're learning things from each other because they have different strengths.
That's right. And then I have to learn things like I got fixated on carnival rides, and I think that was sensory. I like the feeling of spinning around in the rotor carnival ride. And I talk about it just over and over again to the point where everybody else got bored with it. So I kind of have a little rule. You can tell that story twice.
Did you start to recognize that people were getting bored with it, or did someone have to point that out to you? How did that work?
It was pointed out to me. And this is where, you get coached. You see, like training a person with autism and social skills is like training someone in a foreign country. Everything has to be explained. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Don't be vague. You'd say, now, if I'd made a mistake, like I'm eating mashed potatoes with my finger, mother didn't scream no. She'd say, use the fork. In other words, give the instruction instead of screaming no.
Right. So instead of just denying, just say that you're providing that model, you're showing and explaining what the appropriate thing is, but having those expectations.
That's right. Now, I had one little accommodation. Normally, you're supposed to hold your fork like this was a fork. You're supposed to hold it like that. Well, the meat would end up on the floor, so you let me hold it in my fist. And that's still neat. So that's a little bit of accommodation. And mother was just really clever on this sort of thing. I still hold my fork that way because the meat would end up on the floor. I I still have a little bit of, motor clumsiness.
So I think we've got about 1 minute remaining. And I just want to say how much of a pleasure it has been to speak with you and to gain your insight on really the importance of focusing in on strengths and allowing our children with autism to explore their interests and setting expectations for them. And, you being such a model of what children can achieve. And so I appreciate your time today and the insights that you've shared with us. It's been really wonderful.
Well, it was really great being here. I'm glad we finally got the tech to work. And the other thing you have to learn at work is there's going to be, even the best jobs, there's going to be some parts of the job you may not like that much. Okay, going back to that magazine, writing up show and sale results, it's a bunch of lists. Which is, but there's always a certain amount of the boring work that goes along with the fun work.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Temple. And Cindy, I'm not sure if you are jumping in here or how we transition over to our next event.
Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to help these individuals get out and get into interesting careers. Some of the most fun stuff I ever did was in construction, and it was with some people that probably were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. Undiagnosed, of course.
Oh wow, that's so interesting. You've had quite a life, and I commend you for sharing it with the world the way that you have, and your books have really inspired millions, and that's such a powerful legacy. So thank you.
Well, we just got to get them out there doing stuff, and it's amazing the stuff you can find. I was just watching this 3.5-year-old kid learning how the water would come out of opposite ends of this little drain thing that went under our sidewalk at our building. Nice, clean rainwater, and he was learning there. The little mundane thing. I have walked over that metal plate many, many, many times. Just something that mundane. It was turned into a wonderful learning experience, and Dad was showing him how to poke the leaves that were stuck in it with a stick, and then the kid would run around to the other side, and then finally the water came through the other side of this little thing that's just the width of a sidewalk.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Temple. I'm going to wrap up this session so that our participants can move on to their next sessions. And again, I really appreciate all the insight that you shared with us today. And it was an honor and a privilege to interview you.
Thank you so much.